Hi Laura, good evening. It's really great to have you here today, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you and having this conversation around very important topic of environmental justice. From this part of world where I am from, India, there's important ruling that could energize climate litigation in India. At least the Supreme Court said that people had a fundamental right to be free from adverse impacts of climate change, and that this right flowed naturally from the right to life and the right to equality guaranteed in the Indian constitution. And this is a context in India, but I'm sure world over, climate impacts and the frequency of climate impacts and the intensity of climate impacts is increasing. And in the same proportion, the questions around climate justice becomes very important and to the forefront of climate action. So I would like to know from you, can you explain what environmental justice means and why is it such a critical issue today?
Absolutely. So, environmental justice is about upholding the right to a safe, healthy, and sustainable environment and protection from environmental hazards, regardless of someone's race, gender, nation, wealth. And we know, of course, that the most vulnerable communities and those who bear the least responsibility for climate change and environmental degradation are often the most impacted. They're on the front line of these crises, whether that's rising sea levels, extreme heat, drought, food stress, or indeed air and water pollution. There's also inequality across generations, with the young people who aren't yet born, inheriting a crisis that's not of their making. So equity and environmental justice have to be at the heart of what we're doing to address the climate and nature crises. And at ClientEarth, we use the law to strive for greater environmental justice. So we work to strengthen the law, we litigate to hold governments and corporates to account for their commitments, and we also work to support local communities and Indigenous peoples in using the law to defend their environment and uphold their rights.
Thank you for very much for that response. It was really very insightful. Then my next question to you would be, what work does Client Earth do to advance environmental justice? Would you like to speak a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so we do a huge amount, but let me just give a few examples to really bring it to life. So we've done a lot of work to tackle air pollution, for example, working with citizens and community groups, with people young and old, to uphold their right to breathe healthy air. We know that air pollution is one of the biggest killers globally. We've also done quite a lot of work to emphasize that governments have a human rights obligation to take action on climate change mitigation and adaptation. So, for example, we supported a group of Torres Strait Islanders who lodged a complaint to the UN Human Rights Committee saying that the Australian government's inaction on climate change was a violation of their human rights, including their Indigenous right to culture. And they won that case, and it was one of the first human rights climate change cases, which is incredibly important. Beyond that, we work to train judges, lawyers, prosecutors. We work with community groups so that more and more people are using the law to defend their environment, uphold their right to a healthy environment. And so, for example, we work with community groups in West Africa, supporting them with the legal tools they need to engage in forest governance reform and forest conservation. We also look at the human rights impacts of supply chains, for example, and the impact of deforestation on human rights. Finally, another example is engaging at the international level. So there's a huge amount going on in international courts at the moment. So there are advisory opinions at the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, at the International Court of Justice. And we've engaged on those, submitting legal input in legal submissions, but also working with young activists, providing legal trainings so that we can really use that international dimension to drive climate action and put a greater imperative on governments to take further action.
And lastly, if you could achieve one major change at Climate Week this year, what would it be and why?
So the law is a really critical tool in closing the implementation gap, by which I mean the gap between the declarations and commitments that countries make and how they actually deliver. So we're really pushing for more and more countries to adopt national framework climate laws, which provide that legal framework required to deliver on ambitious new nationally determined contributions. Because it's one thing to make a commitment, issue your nationally determined contribution. It's quite another thing to actually have the framework in place to deliver on it. And currently only 60 countries have these framework climate laws. And so we want a Climate Week to be convening people and really galvanizing momentum behind countries not just doing ambitious new NDCs, but also legislating to turn ambition into reality.
Thanks so much for those insights, Laura. It's great to hear as we celebrate environmental justice this week. Make sure to join us at Climate Week NYC this September. Thank you.